A note arrives at the San Francisco Chronicle. August 1969. It begins.
This is the Zodiac speaking.
There have been 3 before it. The police know this. The newspaper knows this. And now, for the first time, he has a name. He named himself.
That detail should not be underestimated. He didn't wait for the press to invent a nickname. He didn't wait for a detective to give him a moniker. He branded himself. He was doing personal marketing before personal marketing was even a concept.
He killed people. He encoded messages in ciphers and dared the public to crack them. He threatened to shoot children off school buses. He taunted detectives by name. He wrote to celebrities. He called radio stations.
He claimed 37 victims. Confirmed? 5. Maybe 7. The rest is mythology. And he built that mythology on purpose.
He was never identified. Never arrested. Never charged. Never definitively named, despite decades of suspects, theories, amateur investigators, professional investigators, books, documentaries, and one of the greatest crime films ever made.
He's the most famous serial killer in American history whose name we still do not know.
Tonight, on the Fear Archive, we are going into the Zodiac, the confirmed murders, the ciphers, the letters, the city of San Francisco at the end of its countercultural dream, the detective whose career it consumed, the cartoonist whose obsession with the case rewrote his entire life, the copycat who terrorized New York 20 years later from a room in his mother's apartment in Brooklyn using homemade zip guns, the cult that was murdering people on the same streets at almost the same time and somehow barely registers in the same conversation. And the films, from a no-budget exploitation trap set by a former pizza restaurant owner to one of the most meticulous and devastating procedurals in cinema history.
And the question we're going to be sitting with all night, what does it do to a city, to a country, to live with a monster it can't name?
And more uncomfortable, what does it say about us that 50 years later, we are still completely riveted?
Welcome back to the Fear Archive, the show where we dig into the real histories behind the horror that lives rent-free in the back of your skull. I'm Mike.
I'm Amanda.
And tonight, we're doing the one that, honestly, we've been circling for a while because there's so much material here that the challenge isn't finding things to say. The challenge is deciding what to leave out.
Which, if you know anything about us, is both of our worst nightmare and our absolute catnip.
Yeah, the Zodiac's not just a case. At this point, it's a cultural institution. It's a haunting. It's generated more books, more films, more conspiracy theories, more amateur investigations, more obsessive amateur investigation than almost any unsolved crime in American history.
And the thing that gets me, the thing that I want to excavate tonight, is that the Zodiac was not the most prolific killer of his era. Not by a long shot. In terms of confirmed victims, he's a fairly modest number. 5 confirmed, maybe 7.
Yet he's everywhere.
He's everywhere. And that's not an accident. He engineered it. The Zodiac is, among other things, a case study in how killer can construct a public identity so deliberately, so theatrically, that the mythology he created outlast any body count that he had.
Robert Graysmith, whose 2 books on this case, which is a big one, Zodiac, published in 1986, and Zodiac Unmasked, published in 2002,
You don't have
are
that
essentially... No, I don't have that one, no.
Mm.
But they're essentially, those 2 are essentially canonical text of this entire story. And Graysmith wrote that the Zodiac had turned San Francisco itself into a stage. The city wasn't just his hunting ground, it was also his audience.
And the San Francisco Chronicle, where Graysmith worked as a political cartoonist, was his most direct line to that audience.
There's something almost unbearably dark about that image. A man sitting in a newsroom drawing caricatures of politicians while across the building, letters from a serial killer are being opened at editorial meetings.
Grace Smith described what it felt like in the building when the letters came in. The particular texture of dread that settles over a room when everyone in it understands that the person who wrote this is not only real, not only out there, but specifically wants you to read this.
And wants you to be afraid.
Content warnings for tonight: graphic violence, descriptions of murder, discussions of threats against children, and a significant quantity of what we might call epistemological horror, the specific terror of not knowing and never knowing.
Also, we're going to talk about a set of murders that happened concurrently in San Francisco that most people have never heard of, and that are, in certain ways, more disturbing than the Zodiac case precisely because they were solved and still seem to have mostly vanished from popular memory.
And we're going to discuss one of the greatest films of the 21st century, which is also a film about the specific agony of obsession, the way a mystery can consume a person from the inside out if they let it in.
We're going to talk about a man who made a movie to catch a serial killer using a motorcycle raffle and an ice cream truck full of cops.
That is a real sentence that just came out of your mouth.
It is. And look, we'll explain later.
Okay, let's go to Northern California, late 1968, and let's start at the beginning, which, like most things about this case, is more complicated than it looks.
December 20th, 1968, Lake Herman Road, Benicia, California. It's a Friday night, and two teenagers are parked in a turnout off the road near a pumping station. David Faraday, 17, Betty Lou Jensen, 16. First date.
It is, and this is important to say before we go further, an unremarkable Friday night in an unremarkable spot in a way that is part of the Zodiac signature. He chose ordinary places, ordinary people, ordinary moments. The horror he introduced was not exceptional by location or circumstance. It was by definition random.
At approximately 11 p.m., someone approached their car. What exactly happened in the seconds before the first shots is not definitively known. What is known is that David Faraday was shot in the head at close range while still in the car. Betty Lou Jensen ran. She was shot 5 times in the back. She died 30 feet from the car.
A woman passing by, Stella Borges, discovered the scene. Police arrived to find 2 teenagers, both dead, in a setting that offered no immediate explanation and no witnesses.
No immediate motive, no immediate suspect, no connection to anything else.
Yet,
6 months later, July 4th, 1969, Blue Rock Springs Park, Vallejo. Another couple parked in an isolated area after midnight. Darlene Ferrin, 22, and Michael Mago, 19. A man approached their car from behind. He used a flashlight, disorienting them. He opened fire.
Michael Mago survived by diving down in the seat. Darlene Ferrin did not. She was shot 4 times. But here's where this attack separates itself from the first one. Approximately 40 minutes after the shooting, the Vallejo Police Department received a phone call. A man's voice. Calm. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, "I want to report a murder. If you go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, you'll find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year."
He called it in himself.
And he referred to the Lake Herman Road murders from 6 months before. He was connecting the dots. He was telling them he was a series.
2 weeks later, on July 31st, 1969, 3 separate letters arrived simultaneously. The San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. Each contained 1/3 of a 408-symbol cipher. Each letter demanded that the cipher be published on the front page, or, the author promised, he would go on a killing rampage.
There was no name on the letters, no return address, but there was a symbol. A circle with a crosshairs through it, the sign of a gun sight. the sign that would become, over the following years, one of the most recognized symbols in American criminal history.
Robert Graysmith, who was in the newsroom when those letters arrived, wrote in Zodiac about the specific sensation of decoding language that someone created specifically to contain their violence. He described the cipher as a kind of locked box, and the thing inside it is something you might not want to find out.
The 408 cipher was solved within a week by a high school teacher in Salinas named Donald Hardin and his wife Betty. The message, once decoded, said, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill something is the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and all that I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife."
It's not a metaphor. That's not performance art. That is someone telling you exactly what they believe, and it is the most genuinely alien value system I have ever encountered in this work.
The slaves for the afterlife motif is something criminologists have written about extensively. It's not unique to the Zodiac. There's a thread of apocalyptic magical thinking running through certain categories of serial violence. The idea that the act of killing confers some form of supernatural benefit. But the Zodiac articulated it with a clarity that most killers with a similar ideation do not.
Yeah, it reminds me of the tall man in Phantasm, or even like Freddy in the early Elm Street movies when he'd like claim the souls of the teenagers he killed.
Yeah, it's definitely also just like the word slave holds so much negative energy into it. I think especially during that time we're just coming out of the civil rights movement, and obviously slavery was around for hundreds and hundreds of years. So,
thousands.
True. Yes, you're right. Thousands.
Yeah, it's really creepy.
It's just such a heavy word, and I just, clearly we don't know who this is.
Yeah.
You don't know what also may have been going through that person's mind, which is disgusting.
Yeah. So, yeah. So a third cipher in the same batch of letters. This one was 340 characters. It remained unsolved for 51 years. So it was finally cracked, times during COVID. It was cracked in December 2020.
We were all bored. We needed something to do.
Yeah. So let's crack an ancient serial killer's, not ancient, but let's dive into nostalgia. I know the Zodiac killer. Let's go to that unsolved cipher.
We did all the Sudokus.
Yeah. I fucking did them all.
All the Wordles are done.
Give me that crazy serial killer's cryptogram. Anyway, so this was December 2020. So a team of 3 amateur code breakers working with computer analysis tools. And the message, when deciphered, reads in part, "I hope you're having lots of fun in trying to catch me. I'm not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise. All the sooner because I now have enough slaves to work for me."
I hate it.
And he spelled paradise wrong. He spelled paradise Paradice.
Yeah.
Not the correct way to spell paradise.
Which he spelled a lot of things incorrectly that we learned.
Yes.
The spelling is intentional, or at least it's consistent, The Zodiac's letters have a pattern of particular misspellings that were analyzed extensively as potential identifying features.
Yes, and then in August 1969, we get the letter to the Chronicle that begins for the first time with the phrase, "This is the Zodiac speaking. He named himself."
In Zodiac Unmasked, Graysmith wrote that the self-naming was one of the most psychological, significant acts of the entire case. Quote, "Learning came easy to him. Life did not." That line, which Graysmith uses to characterize his primary suspect, encapsulates something essential about the Zodiac's particular flavor of pathology. Someone for whom intellect was abundant and human connection was either inaccessible or simply not valued.
So, September 27th, 1969, Lake Berryessa, this is in Napa County, Brian Hartnell, 20, and Cecilia Shepard, 22, both college students. They were picnicking on the shore of the lake when a man approached them. He was wearing a hood, black cloth over his face with a crossed circle drawn on it in white. He was wearing sunglasses underneath the hood.
The hood, the costume. This is where it gets into something else, something more theatrical, more ritualistic. This wasn't just a man with a gun approaching a couple in the dark. This was someone who had made a costume, who had prepared.
He tied them up. He stabbed them both, multiple times. Brian Hartnell survived. Cecilia Shepard died 2 days later from her wounds. Before leaving the scene, the attacker walked back to Brian Hartnell's car and wrote on the door, in marker, the dates of the previous attacks with the words, "by knife," added to this one. He was annotating his own crime scene.
2 weeks later, October 11th, 1969, San Francisco. A cab driver named Paul Stine was shot once in the head in Presidio Heights neighborhood. The killer, or a man matching the description given by witnesses, was seen by multiple people, including 2 teenage witnesses who called the police. 2 police officers stopped a man matching the description in the area shortly after the murder.
And let him go.
They let him go. A radio communication error meant the dispatch description said the suspect was black. The man they stopped was white. They let him go.
It's one of the most agonizing near misses in American criminal history.
Paul Stine's murder is the last killing confirmed as the Zodiac's work. A partial fingerprint was lifted from the cab. Letters continue to arrive at the Chronicle afterward, some containing pieces of Paul Stine's bloodstained shirt as proof.
And here's where the mythology begins to seriously inflate. So the Zodiac claimed 37 victims in subsequent letters. Criminologists, investigators, and the most rigorous researchers do not confirm more than 5, possibly 7, depending on the weight given to certain circumstantial cases, including Riverside and others.
The gap between 5 and 37 is not an accident. It's a deliberate construction. He was building his own legend in real time.
And the San Francisco Chronicle was, whether it wanted to be or not, his publishing house.
Robert Graysmith in Zodiac is unsparing about the ethical complexity of that position. The Chronicle ran the letters because the Zodiac threatened more killings if they didn't. But every time they ran a letter, they were feeding the machine. They were giving a killer exactly what he said he wanted.
And Graysmith himself, who became the most famous private investigator of the case, who wrote the books that became the definitive record, who was played by Jake Gyllenhaal in the greatest film the case has produced, he was not immune to the machine. He became the machine, just in a different form.
Grayson was a cartoonist, not a detective, not a criminologist, not even a crime reporter initially. He was the guy who drew the political cartoons. And he became so consumed by this case, by the ciphers, by the letters, by the question of identity, that it reorganized his entire existence.
And his primary suspect was Arthur Lee Allen, a school teacher who'd been investigated by police multiple times and who matched a significant number of behavioral and circumstantial indicators. Allen was never charged. He died in 1992. The case against him has been critiqued by investigators who argue that Graysmith built a compelling narrative around a suspect who may have been guilty of fitting a profile more than fitting the evidence.
And that tension is actually central to what makes the case so fascinating and so maddening. The Zodiac operated in a period before DNA testing, before the kind of forensic analysis that might have resolved the question definitively. There is a partial fingerprint. There are handwriting samples. There are phone records. None of it was ever enough.
So Graysmith writes in Zodiac, "Just because you can't prove it doesn't mean it isn't true." And that became one of the most famous lines in true crime literature. It's also, and I say this with great love for this book, a sentence that should come with a warning label.
Because obsession has its own epistemology. When you want something badly enough to be true, the absence of proof starts to feel like evidence of suppression rather than evidence of absence.
Which is what happened to Graysmith and to Dave Toschi, the SFPD detective who worked the case for years and to everyone who went deep enough into the material that they couldn't find their way back out.
The last confirmed Zodiac communication was in 1974, a letter referencing The Exorcist, which he called the best satirical comedy he had ever seen. And then, silence.
No arrest, no deathbed confession, no conclusive identification. The case technically remains open.
And now we need to talk about what was happening in San Francisco at the time the Zodiac was operating, because there is a chapter of the city's history that runs parallel to the Zodiac murders, and that is almost completely swallowed by Zodiac's mythology.
The Zebra Murders, October 1973 through April 1974. And if you've never heard of them, that gap in your knowledge is itself a story worth examining.
While the Zodiac was San Francisco's most famous monster, the city was simultaneously being terrorized by a group of operating under an entirely different logic. Not one killer taunting the police with ciphers, but an organized cell operating with a specific ideology mission and racking up a body count that dwarfed anything the Zodiac confirmed.
So the Zebra Murders, named after the police radio frequency assigned to the investigation, Channel Z, were carried out by members of a group called the Death Angels, who are a subset within a faction of the Nation of Islam's Mosque 26 in San Francisco.
The Death Angels had a system. In order to achieve the rank of Death Angel, a member had to kill a quota of white people. The point value varied by victim. More points for women, more for children, least for men. The belief, as documented in Clark Howard's 1979 book Zebra, which remained the definitive account and is worth hunting down if you can find it, was that killing white people, whom they called blue-eyed devils and grafted snakes, was a form of divine service.
Clark Howard's Zebra is one of those books that reads like a novel because he was working from court records, police reports, and direct interviews with some of the killers. He reconstructed scenes with a specificity that is, at moments, genuinely unbearable.
Between October 1973 and April 1974, at least 15 people were killed in San Francisco. 8 were killed on January 28, 1974 alone. A 2005 criminology paper estimated that if you include Death Angel activity across California from 1970 onwards, the number may have been 73 or more. The California Attorney General's office has compiled a secret list of 45 suspects connected to the killings.
One criminologist wrote that the Zebra Murders, and I quote, may have killed more people in the early to mid-1970s than all the other serial killers operating during that period combined, end quote. This is not a minor claim.
The city was paralyzed. Revenue dropped. Restaurants and theaters reported enormous losses. Streets in North Beach, which, if you know San Francisco, is not a neighborhood that empties easily, they were deserted at night.
4 men were ultimately convicted. Manuel Moore, J.C. Simon, Larry Green, and Jesse Lee Cooks. Anthony Harris testified against them in exchange for immunity. The Nation of Islam provided defense attorneys for 3 of the 4.
They're all still in prison, and the Zebra murders are barely a footnote in popular American true crime culture, while Zodiac is an industry.
Part of that disparity is the Zodiac's deliberate self-mythologizing. Part of it is the political discomfort of a racially motivated murder spree in the wrong direction, meaning committed by Black perpetrators against white victims during a period of enormous racial tension. The story didn't fit the available cultural narratives neatly, so it got filed away.
Howard's Zebra is the book. Find it. It's out of print, but not impossible to locate. Read it alongside Grace Smith's work, and you'll get a portrait of San Francisco in those years that is genuinely staggering.
The city was under siege from multiple directions simultaneously, and the only one that became a permanent part of the American mythology was the one that came with ciphers and theatrical letters and a crosshairs symbol.
Which tells you something about what we find riveting and what we find comfortable enough to be riveted by.
Now, before we get to the films, which we're going to spend real time on, let's briefly acknowledge 2 other cases that exist in the Zodiac's gravitational orbit.
The Texarkana Moonlight Murders, 1946. This one predates Zodiac by 2 decades, but it sits in the same lineage. An unidentified serial killer, a specific geographical territory, and a series of attacks on couples and parked cars, and a case that was never solved.
Yeah, the Phantom Killer of Texarkana attacked at least 8 people in the spring of 1946, killing 5 of them. The attacks were in or near Texarkana, which sits on the Texas-Arkansas border. Lovers' lanes, isolated roads, night. It was the template for every rural American nightmare about a couple alone in a car.
The case was never solved, the Phantom Killer was never identified, and the structural similarity to the Zodiac, the targeting of couples in isolated locations, the apparent absence of any personal connection to the victims, the failure to ever catch the perpetrator, it's hard to not notice that.
And then we got the Black Dahlia, January 1947, Los Angeles. Elizabeth Short, 22 years old, found in a vacant lot in Leimert Park. Her body bisected at the waist, completely drained of blood, posed with geometric precision. It's one of the most famous unsolved murders in American history.
The Black Dahlia exists in the same cultural space as the Zodiac. The theatrical quality of the crime, the apparent intent to communicate through the act, the baffling absence of justice, they're all different in kind and geography and era, but they both represent this particular American tradition of the killer as impenetrable mystery, as legend.
Yeah, and James Ellroy, who actually wrote liner notes for the director's cut of David Fincher Zodiac, which is one of those cinematic crossover effects that I find deeply satisfying. Ellroy built his entire career on the Black Dahlia and on L.A. noir. And his novel, The Black Dahlia, is one of the great works of crime fiction precisely because it understands that the murder itself is almost besides the point. The real story is what the mystery does to everyone who tries to solve it.
Which is also not coincidentally the thesis of the Fincher film.
It is. And that's where we're going next.
But before we get into Fincher, I need to say something that I think gets underplayed in serious discussions of this case.
Please.
And the Zodiac was, and I mean this in the most clinical possible sense, extraordinarily good at his job. Like, whatever his job was.
To find the job.
The job was remain unknown, remain mythologized, control the narrative, maintain power over a city through fear without ever getting caught. And by every metric, he succeeded. He is more famous dead or old or, wherever he is than almost any named killer in American history.
Oh, totally. Facts. He's more famous than Richard Ramirez. I'd say and argue he's even more famous than John Wayne Gacy. Zodiac's operating at a cultural level that most killers with far higher body counts never reached.
And he did it almost entirely through correspondence, through letters. He was, in a deeply disturbing way, a brilliant communicator.
Absolutely. I mean, I look and there's so much. We can get so lost in the weeds with this case, but I want to talk about the ciphers for a second because I think they're the most overlooked piece of the mythology.
All right, go ahead. You ready, everyone? Here we go.
Oh, okay.
Mike's brain.
So, I know. I'm gonna just connecting my red string to my murder board. The 340 character cipher. So this thing sat unsolved for 51 years. 51. It was decoded in 2020. And what's interesting about it is not just that it was solved, but how it was solved by a team of like 3 fucking people using modern technology, working collaboratively online. Thank you, COVID. I mean, look, this is a cipher that baffled the SFPD cryptographers, fucking baffled the FBI analysts, the professional code breakers. And this is for like half a century. And finally, it was cracked by a group of dedicated amateurs with computers who were stuck at home during the pandemic.
Which is both like a triumph of democratic investigation and a comment on how inaccessible those tools were in the late 60s. If the same cipher had arrived in 2020, it would have been solved in a weekend, maybe even hours with AI where we are now.
Oh, yeah, totally.
You know?
All right. So The Zodiac was operating in the last decade when it was genuinely possible to construct a cipher that outpaced investigative technology for that long.
And he knew it. That's the thing. Graysmith writes about the way the Zodiac seemed to understand exactly how to push against the limits of what investigators could do at the moment in time. He was calibrated to his era.
Graysmith writes in Zodiac Unmasked that the killer struck close to home, just as the average person chooses stores where he shops daily. Meaning, the geographic clustering of the early crimes suggested familiarity, routine, a person operating within known territory. Not a nomad, not a drifter, not someone ranging across the state, someone who knew those roads.
And yet, nothing. No identification, the partial fingerprint, the handwriting, the voice recordings, all of it in a drawer somewhere still technically active.
Let's talk about the New York detour, because there's a chapter of the Zodiac's afterlife that I find fascinating and deeply sad, and also, honestly, one of the more compelling case studies in how fame, even criminal fame, functions as a kind of instruction manual.
Heriberto Seda, known as the New York Zodiac, born 1967 Brooklyn, and his story begins with a PBS documentary.
Of course it does. Yeah, Seda watched a PBS special about the original Zodiac killer sometime in his early 20s. And according to his own account, given to New York Magazine in 2004, this was the moment his trajectory changed. He had no job, no relationships. He had failed the entrance exam for the Green Berets. He was living with his mother and his half-sister in an apartment in East New York.
He kept scrapbooks about serial killers. He owned what he described as a worn copy of Graysmith's Zodiac. He read Soldier of Fortune magazine. He collected guns. Specifically, he made his own. Homemade zip guns assembled from parts ordered by mail.
AKA one of the guns the bad guy has in the end, in that big crazy brawl at the end of Death Wish 3. Somebody's got a fucking zip gun. Looks crazy. Anyway, the New York Times described this guy as reclusive, obsessed with guns, obsessed with the Bible. He was deeply religious. He ratted out drug dealers to the police while simultaneously preparing to become a serial killer, which is a specific flavor of moral compartmentalization that gives me the willies and keeps me up, honestly.
Yeah, not being a serial killer and a snitch.
No.
Seda began attacking people in 1990. His victims were chosen based on their astrological signs. He was working through the Zodiac. Not the killer, the actual calendar. He targeted people whose birthdays corresponded to specific signs. He would, in at least one case, ask potential victims their birthday before attacking.
Yeah, I totally remember this from being a kid. I remember being so scared hearing about this on the news, right? Yeah, this guy, he shot 9 people, killed 3, and he used those zip guns, which have no rifling, meaning no traditional ballistic match was possible, not initially at least. So Seda sent letters to the New York Post, and he did it in the style of the original Zodiac's letters, complete with crosshair symbol, complete with taunting language.
New York police briefly, seriously entertained the possibility that the original Zodiac had relocated to New York and resumed killing after 2 decades. That is how faithful the imitation was.
Yeah, until they ran height and weight on the letters and got a description that was nothing like the California suspects. And also, a handwriting analyst ruled out the connection. Just this wasn't the same guy.
Seda went dormant for 2 years after 1990, then resumed in 1992, then went dormant again, then was arrested in 1996, not for Zodiac killings, for shooting his own half-sister in an argument about her boyfriend.
Yeah, he shot her in the ass, which is, and I recognize I'm saying this about violent crime, deeply incongruous with the mythology he constructed for himself.
In his written statement at the police precinct, Seda described the family incident, and then at the bottom of the page, he drew the crosshair symbols, the Zodiac symbol, his Zodiac symbol.
Detective Joey Herbert recognized it immediately. Quote Herbert, "The way he wrote his S's and T's, the way he had all the words underlined, I knew it in a second."
They ran major case fingerprints. They found DNA on the stamp of one of the letters Seda had mailed to the police because he had licked the stamp himself. The ballistic tool mark evidence from the zip guns connected him to the attacks.
So he was convicted in 1998 after a 6-week trial, and he was sentenced to 232 years in prison. And he won't be eligible for parole until he turns 264 in the year 2231. I feel like you got to say that in like it's a crazy futuristic voice. In the year 2231.
Yeah.
So essentially this guy's going to fucking rot in
prison. That's so crazy.
That's
the year
he will die.
2231.
That's where it's like it's totally symbolic just to fuck with their heads.
Yeah.
Yeah. So New York Magazine found Seda in prison in 2004 where he'd begun a relationship with a fellow inmate. And Seda told the magazine in what I consider one of the most nakedly honest self-assessments from any killer I've ever read about. "I got nothing to live for. I don't got no job. I already got those skills. I could be famous. I could do that.
I could be famous. I could do that."
The sentence is the entire story. That sentence is every copycat killer who ever existed, distilled to its absolute irreducible core.
The Zodiac gave Heriberto Seda a template, a brand, a franchise model for violence and notoriety. And Seda, sitting in his room in Brooklyn with nothing, looked at that template and thought, I can do that version.
Yeah, the Zodiac is self-help, self-work, right? Who'd have thunk it? So this is what Graysmith was writing about. This is what the Zodiac's architects its own legend strategy actually produced. Produced it downstream, but it produced Heriberto Seda. It produced a generation of true crime consumers whom the name Zodiac is inseparable from a kind of dark glamour.
And produced, eventually, a film that tries very hard to reckon with exactly that.
Let's start with the weird one, because it deserves a place in this conversation before we get to the masterpiece.
Oh my God.
And, by the weird one, I own the special edition double disc Blu-ray of this. Yeah. But this is, by the way, Tom Hansen's The Zodiac Killer from 1971.
Like, I obviously, I had never watched this, and I'm watching it, and I was like, what? Within, like, the first 2 minutes, I'm like, what?
It's a wacky movie. Yeah.
Bring that back 10
was
seconds.
Completely, I was drunk at Monster Mania in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. I mean, because how else do you go to those horror movie conventions if not drunk? But I don't know. I think it was the guy who had the vinegar syndrome table. He was like, yeah, you should buy some stuff from me. And he's like, here, you should buy this. And it's not through vinegar syndrome. It's through AGFA, who are the American genre film. Why can't I think? American Genre Film Association. I think I'm saying that right.
Yeah.
I don't know. Flame me in the DMs and comments. But yeah, no. They do great restorations of films. Anyway, this was a blind buy, and I was not disappointed. I forgot about this film for years though, up until we did the episode. So I had to at least did the research. So I had to go back and rewatch.
Bruh.
How did you find it?
It's on it's streaming on that maybe it was Tubi.
It's probably one of the
It was
free
either
platforms.
Tubi or Fandango. No, Fandango and home I watched The Exorcist. I think it was Tubi I was watching it on. Shout out Tubi again. Yeah. Shout out. Tubi always has the movies.
Shout out Tubi. So yeah, did you know? So you said you had notes.
Yeah, but I feel like maybe we can read through it. Let's tell everyone what the movie's about. And then I just have a bunch of things I wrote, just like shorthand little notes. So
yeah. the guy who made this, he was a pizza man.
Tom Hansen, 1971, The Zodiac Killer. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, and Tom Hansen. Wow. Tom Hansen, not a relative of Chris Hansen. They spell it differently. Not a relative of the Hanson brothers either. The ones from Slapshot, the fictional ones, or the Mbop ones. Yeah. Just Tom Hanson. Also sounds like a fake name. Tom Hanson was a former pizza man. Oh, that was what it was. That was his fucking restaurant was actually called Pizza Man. So he was a former pizza man restaurant chain owner. He had no prior film experience of note, just like all true 1960s, 1970s independent filmmakers. It's like, I got some money. I want to make a movie. So he decided that while the Zodiac Killer was still potentially active, so not wasting any good tragedy here, he wanted to make a low-budget exploitation film about the murders. And his hope was that by showing it in San Francisco theaters, he would lure out the real Zodiac to a screening where he could be caught. It's almost like some kind of like fucked up like William Castle style gimmick, like The Tingler.
That's the plan. That was
we're going to catch a serial killer in
our
audience tonight.
That was actual plan, though, like conceived and executed by a man who slings pizza. It just was like, you know what? I got it. I'll solve the case.
We should write a movie about this.
Let's make a movie.
No, but like, I'm serious. This sounds like a fun, like, Rough House Pictures period piece.
I know.
You know, I always go there. So Hanson, he ran the movie in San Francisco, and this is wild. He staffed the theaters with what can only be described as amateur sting operations. Oh man, are you sure you're not related? Are we sure this guy's not related to Chris Hansen? They both like are into like the sting.
Why don't you have a seat in my theater?
Yeah, have a seat. What do you mean you got a 9? You mean a gun. Anyway, moviegoers. This is wild. This is so insane. So moviegoers who, anyone came in to see this movie were asked to write the phrase, "This is the Zodiac speaking." So their handwriting could be compared to the killer's writing sample. That is fucking bonkers.
And he put an ice cream truck in the parking lot filled with rent-a-cops.
He had a raffle, and the prize was a motorcycle. The logic being, this is fucking so stupid. It's not. It's he's trying, right? The logic being the Zodiac would enter the raffle for the motorcycle, and his handwriting on the raffle entry would identify him. And then he'd come out and a giant cage would fall on him. No,
I mean, this is either the most creative law enforcement adjacent scheme in cinema history or an extremely entrepreneurial attempt to generate ticket sales, and possibly both. But
it was totally both. But the plan, for the record, it didn't work.
What it produced.
Spoiler alert on that one.
What it produced instead was, and this is according to AGFA, the American Genre Film Archive.
Thanks for correcting.
You're welcome. Which rescued this film from near total oblivion. Quote, the most outrageous and compelling tabloid horror vortex in history of planet Earth and beyond.
Whoa. The and beyond part. It's doing a lot of work in that sentence.
AGFA partnered with Something Weird Video to restore the Zodiac Killer in 4K from one of the only known surviving 35mm prints. They released it on Blu-ray with the full commentary, an interview with Hansen and his producer Manny Nedwick, and liner notes by Chris Pagali of The Temple Schlock.
The film itself is, let's say, a historical document. It's rough, it's cheap, the acting is what it is. But what AGFA director Joseph Zamba said about this film in the Austin Chronicle, it is spot on here, folks. He said, it's very close to reality in terms of the reporting of the crimes, but everything else about it is so false, and that's why I love it.
Yeah, there's also formal critique buried in the film that almost nobody talks about, which is that Hansen actually inverted the exploitation genre's typical treatment of women. The male characters in this film are, and I quote the AGFA notes, terrible misogynistic turds who get what's coming to them.
Fair.
Which is not the usual configuration in exploitation cinema of this era. And I think this is kind of a lot of my notes.
Yeah, no,
that I'm excited to read.
Go for it. Is this a good point?
Yeah, probably. Okay, so now we have a little landscape of what it is. Let me read you some of the notes I wrote down. First, so cheesy, the first kill. What was that? The blood going down the sidewalk? Okay.
Yeah.
We have our first sighting of a Karen on screen, a woman complaining about her mailbox to the mailman. He is also, every man is a woman hater. Another note I have. I then wrote after that, what the fuck is this? The next line I wrote is a quote, I like 'em plump and juicy, and them talking about women.
Oh boy.
Did he next line? Did he just say the F word? And when I say the F word, I'm talking about the derogatory word for gay men, said multiple times in a sentence. Calling women bitches was normal, and it was in most conversations in the film, and it's very uncomfortable. That was a note I had. Next note, a rape joke. The guy said to some women in a bar, come on, I'm not going to rape you here. That guy's hairpiece.
Grover? I remember there's a character named Grover and he gets shot and he falls in the pool. Remember that?
Yeah. Slave conversation.
Yeah, I think it was
really
Grover.
Off-putting. What was the campfire singing? Like, did we need that like musical number?
They had film. They couldn't waste it. They had to use it.
When they're sitting around the campfire and he pulls the disguise out of the bag, I almost spit my water out. He's like, the wig. And then he says, and look at this fake nose. And then he puts on like the like caricature like glasses with the fake nose attached from like when we were kids. I'm like, a disguise? Okay. Then this line, the woman goes, your hot dogs are delicious. And then the guy goes, I'm so very thrilled you liked them. I will say
you're doing the Lord's work by taking notes on this movie. I don't think anyone else ever did.
The lakeside killing, it felt like a snuff film. I will say that.
It did. That was like one of the creepier parts in the movie, right? Like
it felt like
that
a snuff
murder.
Film. Not that I've really seen any snuff films. I mean, I've only,
the way the knife goes
like,
in, it looks like it goes in.
It was just
and this was like no CGI.
Real.
This was also before like Savini style makeup effects. Like
it just felt real. The one thing that wasn't real was the acting of like how you would actually like yell and screech out if you're being stabbed, because I have read and seen that it's like agony. But anyway, that was like the best part of the whole, not the best part, but like the, you know, the whole film. Stomping on the woman with the hood of the car.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah.
I was like, what?
Forgot about that.
Yeah. And then the very end when he rolls his dad down the hill and then it comes to like a stop and then magically like makes a left turn and falls down the staircase.
Falls down. Yeah.
I was like,
you're like, did he just want to scare him and leave him like that? Nope. He's gonna die.
Anyway, okay, those are my notes. But yeah, whoever wrote that, which may have been the pizza man,
it was Tom Hansen.
It's like misogynistic. Like he absolutely hates women.
Yeah,
like he hates women. It's crazy.
This was the Zodiac killer as
and
moral.
you know, it just makes me think of like, you know, and like all the boomer generation and the generation before them, they're like, y'all are so soft. You don't want to talk in a certain way. And I'm just like, if this is the way you were talking, yeah, I definitely don't want to talk that way. That's insane.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Anyway.
The Zodiac killer is moral corrective for toxic masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
From a pizza entrepreneur.
Yeah, and this is why preservation matters, right?
Yeah. So, you know, this film also had a competitor in 1971. This is a much more prestigious film. I guess you call it prestigious. It's a big deal in the Zodiac film space. So this is the same year that the movie Dirty Harry came out. 1971, Don Siegel, Clint Eastwood. And I want to spend a minute on the relationship between those two films and the case because it's one of the most interesting triangles in American cinema.
Dirty Harry's villain Scorpio, played by Andy Robinson, in a performance so convincing he received death threats afterward, and he had to get an unlisted phone number. It's directly based on the Zodiac, named after a zodiac sign, operating in San Francisco, sending taunting letters and phone calls, wearing a mask during at least one attack.
Yeah, Andy Robinson is the dad in Hellraiser, too. So he had a nice career playing creepy people. So, the climax of this film, and it is a great film. In the climax, Scorpio hijacks a school bus full of children, and he takes it directly from the Zodiac's actual threat, which is horrifying. Remember, the Zodiac wrote to the Chronicle that he planned to shoot out the tires of a school bus and then shoot the children as they ran from it. Thankfully, that threat was never carried out. But fucking Dirty Harry turns it into a film sequence.
Harry Callahan himself is based on Dave Toschi, the SFPD detective who spent years pursuing Zodiac. Toschi was unconventional, colorful, distinctive. He wore his holster upside down, which Steve McQueen saw and used for Bullet. He later said he walked out of the screening of Dirty Harry because it hit too close.
Yeah, the meta layers here, they're extraordinary. So Toschi is the real detective. His style inspires Bullet. His case inspires Dirty Harry. And then, 36 years later, David Fincher makes Zodiac, in which the fictional Toschi, played by Mark Ruffalo, is taken by his department to a special screening of Dirty Harry. The mayor walks past him in the lobby and says, "Hey, that Harry Callahan did a hell of a job with your case."
It is one of the greatest self-aware jokes in the history of crime cinema.
Yeah, totally. And such a funny scene. Anyway, with Andy Robinson, for what it's worth, dude's a pacifist who deeply disliked firearms, and he reportedly flinched every time he fired one during production. He created an elaborate personal backstory for Scorpio involving Vietnam and PTSD that didn't make it into the final film, but reportedly informed his performance in ways that Clint Eastwood thought were worthwhile.
Which is a reminder that the best acting is the most invisible acting. Scorpio works because you can feel that there is a person in there, however broken and wrong and terrifying.
Now, the Fincher film, 2007. And I want to start where Fincher himself starts, which is a personal story.
Fincher grew up in the Bay Area. He was a child during the Zodiac's active period. He said that he came home from school one day and his father, described as not one to soft pedal things, told him there was a serial killer who had threatened to shoot the tires out of school buses and then shoot the children as they ran off.
His father said to him, as a child, matter-of-factly,
Fincher grew up with the Zodiac as the ambient background radiation of childhood fear. And when the opportunity came to make a film about the case, he brought that personal history with him. Not as trauma, exactly, but as a particular kind of knowledge that you can only get from having lived in proximity to a thing.
The screenplay was written by James Vanderbilt, based on Graysmith's 2 books. Fincher, Vanderbilt, and producer Bradley Fisher spent 18 months conducting their own investigation before a single frame was shot. They interviewed surviving victims, surviving detectives, surviving witnesses even. They pulled original police files for the script.
The result is a film that runs 2 hours and 42 minutes and that critics at the time called slow and anticlimactic, and that has since been voted in a 2016 BBC poll of critics the 12th greatest film of the 21st century.
12 greatest of the 21st fucking century. That's a placement that puts it alongside Mulholland Drive, No Country for Old Men, In the Mood for Love, There Will Be Blood. I'd say it's in good company.
Yeah. The film has 3 protagonists. Dave Toschi, the detective played by Mark Ruffalo, with the extraordinary quietness. Ruffalo read every report on the case and met with Toschi himself, who had a perfect recall of every detail. Paul Avery, the Chronicle crime reporter, played by Robert Downey Jr., in a performance that is essentially a controlled demolition of charm. You watch a person disintegrate from sharp to wrecked over the course of 2.5 hours. And Robert Graysmith, played by Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yeah, Fincher, talking about the Gyllenhaal casting, said, I really liked him in Donnie Darko, and I thought he'd be an interesting double-sided coin. He can do the naive thing, but he can also do the possessed thing, which is exactly what Graysmith's arc requires.
Gyllenhaal met Graysmith, videotaped him, studied his mannerisms. The performance is from the inside out. It starts as a specific person and transforms, almost perfectly, into a different specific person. The same man, but hollowed out and filled with something else.
The film's supporting cast is staggering. Anthony Edwards is Toschi's partner Armstrong, Brian Cox is flamboyant defense attorney Melvin Belly, Chloe Sevigny is Graysmith's increasingly frightened wife, Philip Baker Hall, Donald Logue, and John Carroll Lynch as Arthur Lee Allen.
John Carroll Lynch, who is one of the great character actors in American cinema and whose performance as Alan is so effectively ambiguous that I've watched the film 5 times and still cannot tell you whether the film thinks Alan did it.
That ambiguity is the point, and it's the most rigorous and honest choice Fincher makes, because the evidence against Alan is compelling and the evidence against Alan is also insufficient. Both things are true simultaneously, and the film holds both things simultaneously, which is almost unbearable.
There's a scene in the film that I want to describe because I think it's the best example of what Fincher is doing formally. Graysmith, deep in the investigation, visits the home of a man named Bob Vaughn, a peripheral figure with possible connections to the case. The house is strange. The man is strange. The basement is mentioned.
And nothing happens. Nobody attacks. No jump scares. But by the end of that scene, I have to remind myself to breathe. Fincher creates dread by implication, by accumulation of wrongness in an ordinary space. It is, technically speaking, horror filmmaking at the highest possible level without a single element of conventional horror.
I rewatched it this week, and I was like, don't go in the basement. Don't go in the basement.
I remember seeing that scene unfold in the theater. I saw this opening weekend. Anyone who knows Long Island, I saw this at Movie Land in Coram, RIP. But the funny part about this is it was like a matinee show and there were all these older people there. And these 2 old men got into a screaming match, like at some point close to the scene in the movie, because the one old dude picked up his phone and was like having a conversation on his phone for like 5 minutes. So the other guy, yeah. And then the guy got up. He goes, "Hey, get off your fucking phone." And then he's like, "Why don't you shut your fucking mouth?" And they're going back and forth. And then they just both shut up.
So
but it was like surreal. And like, I don't know. I think I actually remember they may have turned the lights on just to kind of scare them a little bit. And then they turned the lights back down, the projection people. Coram.
The cinematographer was Harry Savies, who used this Thompson Viper film screen digital camera for most of the film and traditional film cameras for the murder sequences. The visual language is extremely specific. The period detail is immaculate. The color palette is muted and institutional in a way that makes everything feel documented rather than dramatized. And yet the film has this underlying visual anxiety that never fully resolves.
Fincher shot some scenes up to 90 takes. That's like Stanley Kubrick level. Fincher shot some scenes up to 90 takes. Gyllenhaal talked in interviews about the frustration of working that way, the grinding repetition, the feeling of being trapped in the same moment indefinitely. Ruffalo said he read every report on the case and met with Toschi before a single take. The preparation was commensurate with the director's demands.
Downey, when asked about the experience, said he decided, aside from several times that I wanted to garrote Fincher, that I was going to give him what he wanted. And then, in what I consider a career-defining quote, added, "I think I am a perfect person to work for him because I understand gulags."
Oh, some harsh browns right there. Robert Downey Jr. comparing David Fincher's production mythology to a Soviet labor camp. Jeez. And this is on record, guys. This is in a press junket.
He meant it kindly.
Yeah. So the film grossed $84 million worldwide on a $65 million budget. Ugh. Not a commercial triumph. and the critics at release were divided. So as we said earlier, some people found it too long and too procedural, too unwilling to resolve. Roger Ebert, he gave it 4 stars and understood it. A lot of other critics wrote it off as a missed opportunity.
And then time happened. And then the reappraisal has been so total that it is now sits in a list alongside the finest cinema of its era. Because what looks like withholding in 2007 reads now as the most honest possible response to a case that actually withholds. The film refuses to resolve because the case refuses to resolve. It is not a failure of storytelling. It is fidelity to fact.
Yeah, the movie it was such a treat to rewatch this. It really, it aged, I think it aged beautifully.
I honestly like the set design, the costumes, like it really was true to the time.
Yeah.
I loved all the yellow. I don't know if you recognize all the yellow.
Oh
and
yeah,
all the
but
furniture
totally. I
and
mean,
everything.
that's definitely got to be a nod to the book itself.
It was so good.
Yeah. Yeah, and it also kind of like it really showed you where he was going to be going with his other work, especially when we flash forward many years to Mindhunter. I mean, so another cool thing about this all is Robert Graysmith himself. He visited the set. And, Graysmith, it got the stamp of approval from him. It got Dad's approval here. He said it was very accurate in ways that were, by his own account, like he called it disorienting.
I couldn't even imagine going to a set that's made to replicate your experience like that.
Oh, yeah. It's total head fuck, right?
Something that also has like haunted you your entire life and is not solved,
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's also a 2005 low-budget entry worth flagging. It's simply called Zodiac, directed by Alexander Buckley, and not to be confused with the Fincher film. It is not a good film, but it exists in the tradition of the Hansen picture, regional, earnest, and interesting primarily as evidence of the case's gravitational pull on filmmakers who are not equipped to resist it.
Yeah, and the Zodiac has permeated television in ways that go beyond any specific documentary or dramatization. The figure of the cipher writing, identity-concealing serial killer who taunts investigators through media, all that's become essentially a stock type in crime fiction.
You can draw a direct line from Zodiac to the Jigsaw Killer in Saw, to John Doe in Seven, which is Fincher's earlier, more conventionally thrilling serial killer film, to any number of prestige drama antagonists who combine violence with intellectual provocation.
Yeah, and the Zodiac invented that archetype, or at least made it culturally permanent.
And the Fincher film is partly about what that archetype does to people it touches, which is it consumes them. Not the killer, but the mystery, the puzzle, the unsolvability.
Yeah. Graysmith lost his marriage to the obsession, ruined his life. Toschi watched the city fail to catch the man he devoted years to finding, then watched a movie that gave the city the ending it wanted and had to leave the theater. Avery drank himself into a boat on the Sacramento River. These guys didn't walk off into the sunset.
Yeah, the most accurate thing the film says about the Zodiac case is not any specific fact about a specific crime. It's the look on Jake Gyllenhaal's face in the final act. The look of a man who has found the answer and can prove nothing.
Just because you can't prove it doesn't mean it isn't true.
Graysmith wrote that in Zodiac. Fincher put it in the film. And then in the film, Toschi, played by Ruffalo, responds with, "Easy, Dirty Harry."
The circle completes.
Okay. I think it's our through line time. The question we've been building towards since the cold open.
What does it do to a city, to a culture, to live with a monster it cannot name?
And the subsidiary question, which I think is actually the more interesting one, what does it say about us that we remain this riveted?
I want to start with the geography, because the Zodiac was a San Francisco story in a way that is inseparable from what San Francisco was in 1968 and 1969.
Gray Smith wrote that San Francisco seems to be the last sanctuary for the rootless in its tolerance for every form of lifestyle. He was writing about his suspect, about the kind of person who could move through San Francisco in that period without generating attention, without being clocked as wrong.
It was the tail end of the summer of love. The countercultural experiment was still visible, but already decomposing. The hate had already curdled. Manson had already happened. And so that specific cultural moment, a city that had once oriented itself around freedom and tolerance and the rejection of surveillance, walked someone who weaponized that tolerance.
The Zodiac operated in the spaces that openness creates. The lover lanes, the dark parks, the cab rides, the places where strangers are not questioned.
And he sent his communication to newspapers, not to the police primarily, to the press, because he understood that the press was the mechanism of public fear, and public fear was the thing he was actually manufacturing.
The ciphers were not communications. They were performances. They were evidence that he had interiority, that there was a system to him, a logic, a code. Whether the ciphers contained genuine content or were partly theatrical prop is still debated.
What they definitely contained was the message, "You cannot read me. I am more complex than you can decode." And that message is the core of the Zodiac's power over everyone who encountered it.
Dave Toschi, to me, the most tragic figure in this entire story. A genuinely skilled detective operating within the constraints of investigative technology that was simply not equal to the task. He was not incompetent. The FBI was not incompetent. Gray Smith was not chasing phantoms. The problem was a structural mismatch between what the investigation could do and what solving the case required.
And Toschi had to watch from his actual real life as the city processed its fear about his unresolved case by going to see Dirty Harry and cheering for the version of events where the detective catches the killer.
The fantasy version, right? I mean, where justice comes at gunpoint in 30 seconds and there are sequels.
Yeah, make my day, punk, right?
Mm-hmm. We still say it to this day. I mean,
So the Zodiac case is, among other things, a case study in how America processes the things it can't resolve. It can't resolve them through the justice system, so it resolves them through fiction. And fiction gives its ending. And endings repeated often enough start to feel like the thing actually happened.
Which is why Fincher's refusal to give an ending is so important and so uncomfortable. He is making a film that actively resists the thing that all the other Zodiac films and all the other Zodiac adjacent films, going back to Dirty Harry, were built to provide.
He's making a film about what it actually looks like to live live inside an unresolved case, which is, it looks like obsession. It looks like the slow erosion of everything else. It looks like Jake Gyllenhaal sitting in a basement with someone who may or may not have killed dozens of people and having absolutely no way to prove it.
The zebra murders got resolved. 4 men were convicted. The city got a verdict. And the city moved on so completely that Clark Howard's definitive book is nearly out of print, and the case barely exists in popular conscientious.
What that contrast tells us, the Zodiac remembered, the zebra murders forgotten, is that resolution actually kills mythology. The Zodiac is immortal because it has no ending. The zebra case has an ending, and endings are where myths go to die.
Which is almost unbearably ironic when you consider the zebra murders killed many more people than the Zodiac.
Robert Graysmith, and I want to end this section with him because I think he is the human face of this entire phenomenon. So Graysmith spent decades of his life in the gravitational field of the Zodiac. He wrote 2 books. He consulted on the film. He watched Jake Gyllenhaal play him on the screen. He has said in interviews that the case changed the direction of his entire existence.
And he still doesn't have a definitive answer. Arthur Lee Allen, his primary suspect, died in 1992 without a confession. The DNA evidence, when finally tested, did not match Allen. Other suspects have been proposed. Gary Francis Posty, which was identified by a cold case team called the Casebreakers in 2021 as the primary suspect. But the conclusion was contested by investigators and is far from universally accepted.
The case is technically still open. The SFPD cold case unit still lists it.
The Zodiac is still, legally, a suspect at large.
And Graysmith's line, just because you can't prove it doesn't mean it isn't true, turns out to be true in both directions. It's true for believers. It's also true for the case itself. Just because we can't prove who the Zodiac was doesn't mean the Zodiac isn't still out there somewhere, or dead, or both, or neither.
The mystery is the answer. The not knowing is the point. And I think that is what the Fincher film understands, that no other version of the story understood. The Zodiac was not a problem to be solved. He was a condition to be lived in.
And some people, Graysmith, Toschi, everyone who went deep, found they couldn't stop living in it.
Which is, when you think about it, exactly what he wanted.
So, where's this leave us?
With a case that is 57 years old, technically still open, and more culturally omnipresent than most solved ones.
With a film that lost money on release and is now considered one of the greatest of its century.
With a copycat who did it for fame and is serving 232 years in a cell he will never leave.
With a parallel massacre that happened on the same streets and in the same years and that barely anyone can name.
With Robert Graysmith, who started as a cartoonist and became the most famous amateur investigator in American true crime history without ever being able to close the case.
I want to take a moment here before the end to say the names. David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Ferrin, Cecilia Shepard, Paul Stine. These 5 are the confirmed dead. They were not ciphers. They were not mythology. They were people on an ordinary night in ordinary places who encountered something that had no reason to exist.
And the families of the zebra victims, many of whom attended memorial services for decades without any political acknowledgement from the city that was supposed to serve them. And their names are in Clark Howard's book, page after page, and they deserve to be in the conversation.
And with all of that said,
here it comes.
We're obligated, as a show, to close on a note that is both appropriate to the material and calibrated to our particular brand of deeply questionable humor.
I'm ready. I'm prepared.
All right. So the Zodiac terrorized the city of San Francisco for years using nothing but letters, symbols, and a knack for dramatic timing.
He was essentially doing performance art, but with crimes.
Yeah, he was the original crypto bro.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I know. I'm an asshole. Encrypted communications. All right. Anonymous identity, a dedicated online, newspaper community trying to decode his messages, convinced his actions were building towards an elaborate afterlife payoff.
You just somehow were able to make the Zodiac Killer into cryptocurrency comparison.
Oh, man. Yeah. Well, look, he literally promised returns on the afterlife. That's an NFT.
He was running a long con.
Yeah. Yeah. The Zodiac built an entire legend around the idea that his true identity would never be revealed. He would be pleased to know that in the 21st century, a man named Graysmith came closest to cracking him, and that the Zodiac's response to that would probably have been another letter.
Dear Mr. Graysmith, I enjoy your speculation. It is wrong. I will be in my basement collecting more slaves. Signed, Z.
Yeah, he'd totally have a Substack.
Yeah, a very successful one with a paid tier and lots of subscribers, probably.
Yeah, the crosshairs are his logo.
Merch.
Oh, yeah, he'd have merch. The ciphers is limited
we're
edition.
Going to hell. This is not good.
No. He's probably going to come for me, along with, who's the other one? Danny LaPlante and, the cruising guy.
Paul?
Imagine the 3 of these people show up on my doorstep. That's who's upstairs right now. It's one of those 3.
They're frogging?
Yeah. They're actually, imagine that all 3 of them were hiding out in my house.
That's who's upstairs.
So this has been the Fear Archive. Tonight we went back to Northern California in the late 60s, and we didn't come back entirely, which is the traditional outcome in engaging with this material.
Yeah, if this episode stayed with you, and it should. It should stay with you for a pretty long time, not just because the Zodiac is still technically at large, but because the question this case raises are the ones we haven't finished answering.
What does uncaught evil do to a culture? What does the refusal of resolution produce? Who gets remembered and who gets forgotten, and why?
Those questions are for maybe next week or the week after, or, some dead air episode we put out. But
yeah.
That's the whole point, right?
Right. And if you want to go deeper, again, you should get Robert Graysmith's Zodiac and Zodiac Unmasked. And I don't have Zodiac Unmasked because I gave it away to someone who let someone borrow it, and then I never got it back. But those two are canonical texts. And we also have Clark Howard's Zebra for the parallel story that the city deserves to remember. And you should also check out Kieran Crowley's Sleep My Little Dead for the New York Zodiac case. And of course, you should rewatch David Fincher's Zodiac on whatever streaming platform will carry it this week.
And don't watch the Pizza Mans. Don't watch Pizza Mans.
It's kitschy, but it's pretty shitty.
It's triggering.
If you can, with the Fincher thing though, if you can find the actual director's cut of the film, I recommend that one too. I think that one clocks in at about 3 hours. So it's an investment of your time.
Rate us, share us with someone who has strong opinions about unsolved ciphers and/or Robert Downey Jr.'s filmography.
Yeah, and we'll be back with another story that doesn't resolve neatly.
Because nothing really ever does.
And until then,
look out for each other.
And maybe don't park on any dark roads.
Yeah, and don't get in a cab, and maybe don't go out to the lookout.
Maybe don't drive a cab. Of course, I shouldn't say don't drive a cab. Some people have to do it. But don't take in those crazy weirdos.
Yeah. And if you receive a letter beginning with the phrase, "This is the Zodiac speaking,"
call the police.
Definitely call them. Yeah.
Yeah, and then call us.
For sure. Slide into the DMs, y'all.
Yeah.
We'll run a special episode for you.
We absolutely will.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Fear Archive, hosted by Amanda Kagawada and Michael Ryan Aesop, produced by Cassie Josephove, with original music by Umberto. This podcast is a production of Violet Hour Media.